Good morning. You are very welcome to today's CBI at 10 webinar. My name is Kerry Thomas. I'm an editor at a news startup called Tortoise, and looking forward very much to a conversation over the next 45 minutes about the state and the prospect for the British economy. I guess looking around, I don't suppose there's ever been a time when our health prospects and our economic prospects have felt so closely intertwined. And I say that because of those pictures we all saw yesterday of Margaret Keenan, 90-year-old Margaret Keenan, getting the first dose in the world of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine in Coventry. They weren't just brilliant for her and for public health, they were potentially great news for the economy too. So hopefully some of those worst predictions about the impact of the pandemic on the economy may not come true. Possibly the light at the end of the tunnel just came a bit closer, but it doesn't mean that we're out of the tunnel. So today, from inside our tunnel, I think we've got the chance to look around a bit, to look back over our experience since March and to look ahead. And we've got three fantastic panelists to help us do that. We've got Mel Stride, who's the chair of the Treasury Select Committee and MP for Central Devon, one female. We've got Lizzie Hills, who is the Commercial Finance Director for Burger King. Morning, Lizzie. And as ever, senior person from the CBI, we've got Chief Economist Rain Newton-Smith. Before I come to Rain, just a couple of sort of parish notices. Firstly, you probably know if you've been on these calls before that we really do want to get as many questions, comments, thoughts in from you as we possibly can. So please do fire those in via the question button that you'll see somewhere there on your screen. If you want to put something in anonymously, then by all means do that. Just write anon at the top of it and we will treat that in confidence, as we always do. And secondly, just to mark your card for tomorrow morning at 10, there is an extra CBI at 10 webinar with Pfizer and Ben Osborne from Pfizer and Professor Debbie Sridhar looking at the Pfizer vaccine and the potential for the rollout of that, the effect of that, and so on. So that's I think a lot of you may want to come to that tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Do sign up through the website. But let's tuck in. Rain, we always say this, don't we? It's been another busy week. It's been another busy week on the pandemic, on Brexit. Pull us out some highlights.
Yeah, I mean, look, Kerry, I think we all welled up a bit when we saw Margaret in her Christmas jumper receiving that vaccine yesterday. And I think, as she articulated, yeah, the best birthday present she could possibly hope to receive. And I think that's a birthday present we absolutely want for the whole economy. So it's certainly hugely welcome news on the vaccine. But I think, as you alluded to, the challenge for many of us is we're still in that sort of bleak midwinter at the moment, and because we're going to be living with the virus still around us for a while longer yet. And I think even, we do know there are some practical implications. Even those who receive the vaccine will still need to self-isolate if they're contacted by NHS test and trace, because although the vaccine gives immunity, we still don't quite know yet what the science is behind how it transmits to other people. And of course, as you say, who better to sort of go through the expertise on that than Debbie, Professor Sridhar and Pfizer tomorrow. So do tune in for that. But we, talking to our members, everyone has sort of said, look, they really want to play a role and support the government, in any way possible, in one, getting public confidence around that vaccine. It's so important. And we know that that's true for any vaccination program rolled out before around public health. It's so vital that anyone who can get that vaccine goes and gets it as soon as possible. And playing that role in distribution, how can we use workplaces themselves as a place to distribute that, further down the line? Obviously, the priority now is elderly people and our NHS staff and care homes, absolutely rightly. Of course, the other big thing, totally remiss if I don't mention Brexit. We are absolutely waiting for bated breath with for the PM's meeting and what might come out of that. I think, look, for businesses, I can't quite believe it's 22 days from the end of this transition period, and we still don't quite know what the shape of that economic deal will be. And look, it is deeply frustrating for business. I think from both sides, everyone can see the landing zone for a deal and compromise. But look, I'm an economist, but I recognize this isn't about economics, right? It's about the politics, and it's absolutely a time for political leadership on both sides. And look, if we fail to get a deal over the line by the end of the year, it won't be the worst thing that's happened to the economy this year. But I think no one really wants to see it through, though, isn't it? I mean, I think we do have to put this in context, and I think COVID has helped to do that. I am not underplaying the challenges around Brexit, but I think if you talk to any business, it's certainly not going to help, right? Um, and I think we are already picking up from members and those who are operating through ports that they are noticing some delays in ports anyway. And I think, look, there are COVID delays in supply chain still that, if you talk to the construction industry, are still very much present there. So look, anything we can do to address that, make sure we have that deal. I'm hoping that's my Christmas present by the end of the week. I know many of us feel the same. And in terms of the role of the CBI, we're absolutely trying to convene business and keep that information flow going with government, because even in the case of a deal, there will be things that need to be sorted out in terms of facilitation over the coming days and weeks. And we've had some really helpful weekly meetings with Michael Gove on the Brexit task force, and we've brought together advanced manufacturing, food and agriculture, professional services. And Michael Gove has confirmed that those meetings will continue into the new year, and that will be so important. And let's hope we get to the other side of this year and we can move on and really look at implementing the deal itself. I think that's where everyone wants to be. At the CBI, we have our transition hub. So, that's a portal which brings together all the information available from government, and lots of advice there. So we, businesses should reach out to that. And we are going to have a webinar focusing on customs and goods next week on the 16th of December. So do tune into that. And of course, we will, despite the Christmas holiday period, we will be on hand and providing updates as needed as things unfold over the coming days or weeks. So fingers crossed and toes as well.
All right, Rain, I think you're an early contender for today's glass half full prize with that comment about it won't be the worst thing that's happened this year if we get no deal. But anyway, let's turn to the economy, because we're here to look at to review how the economy has done and perhaps to look forward a bit to see what the next few months look like. Where do you, just in sort of macro terms, where do you think we stand after all that we've been through?
Well, look, I think in a way, and I will. This is where I will summon up my optimistic self, and I think on one level, the worst is absolutely behind us in terms of the fall in output that we've seen so far this year. That was absolutely, concentrated in Q2, where we saw over 60% of the global economy in some form of lockdown, and obviously here in the UK, we saw output fall by over 20%. And I think, look, we're still in a period where there are restrictions on the economy. That is really tough for the businesses that are affected. But the nature of this lockdown and maybe, of what we've seen in parts of England over the past few weeks is very different to the previous lockdown. The majority of the economy is open. We've all adapted and got used to living with the virus and adapting our behavior. And I think we are in this sort of position almost where I almost describe it as a 95% of the economy where I'm not saying there aren't challenges out there, but for a lot of businesses, they are saying they have adapted, they've adjusted, they are seeing growth in parts of their business. But then for some sectors are still absolutely at the eye of the storm in terms of the restrictions. Aviation, hospitality, leisure, sports, arts, entertainment, still really absolutely in the thick of it. And that's where getting that vaccine in place and that whole rollout will be so important as we, hopefully start to emerge from some of the restrictions that are still in place in parts of the country over the course of the coming weeks and as we move into spring. I think if we think about the impact on the economy as a whole, we like the OBR, and our forecast is coming out tomorrow, so I can't give you all of the detail on that, but I think the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, put out their forecast alongside the spending review, and what that showed is, and most economists see this, is that the economy will probably shrink as a whole by about 11% this year. But from now, we should see growth return. The OBR expected the economy to expand by about 5.5% next year, and actually we think it could be a bit stronger than that. It will primarily be driven by household spending and also the support we've seen from government. And I think the bit that is missing in terms of the recovery, where we're very much focused on, is business investment. How can we get business investment going in the economy? And we're working with various ideas with government on that, from productivity vouchers to looking at business rates reform to really get the investment, particularly in the transition to a net zero economy and energy efficiency. But getting business investment going and as quickly as possible will be one of the things that could help us recover a lot quicker even than that 5.5% next year. And I think, look, apart from business investment, the second big challenge that we are absolutely facing next year is rising unemployment. We know the furlough scheme at the moment has been vital, particularly for those sectors that have been affected. And actually, in recent weeks, the number of people on furlough, understandably, because of the restrictions, has gone up from around 10% of the workforce to around 15%. The Bank of England estimates we've got about 5.5 million people on furlough at the moment. And I think the real challenge over the course of the next few weeks is to bring those people from furlough back into full-time in their place of work employment, and to minimize rising unemployment. It could well peak at about 7.5% next year. And so this focus on business investment, job creation, adult retraining, helping young people into the labour market, that is the number one macroeconomic challenge I think that is facing us as a nation as we move into next year.
Great, Rain, that really helps us, I think, just to get our heads around where we are. Let me come to Mel Stride MP, if I can. Mel, thanks so much for joining us. I think we've all been subject to mood swings about the economy over the last several months, depending on how under control the virus has felt, depending on the state of the vaccine program, depending on the Brexit negotiations. What's the state of your mood about the economy at the moment as we look ahead to 2021?
I think broadly where Rain's is, Rain mentioned the OBR forecast, which sees unemployment spike up next year to about 7%. And put that in perspective, we were below 4% back in March, and each percent, 300,000 people who very unfortunately are going to be out of work. So that's quite a dramatic surge. We've obviously had a very severe contraction in the size of the economy, the 20% plus since Q4 2019. But some of that, 5% or thereabouts, probably next year, will come back. I think the challenges are threefold, if I may put it that way. One is, what's the progress of getting on top of the virus? So we've got a vaccine, that's very good news. The early signs are good. The Pfizer one's difficult to get out there logistically, but the Oxford AstraZeneca one, which we hope will get approval soon, looks more promising in that sense, and we have a greater supply of it. But there are still the unknown issues of how good are we going to be at getting it out, how quickly can we do it, and how effective is it going to be, particularly in terms of if somebody gets the effectivity around those who have actually been given that virus. So I think there's the point about the virus. The second thing is behavioral changes. So even if you're getting the virus out and restrictions are being removed, but people feel difficult about or awkward about going out, they don't feel it's safe and so on, that will still have an economic impact. My view on that is that I think people will be more relaxed than they were, say, back pre the first lockdown, where everybody was very worried about this virus. I think people will be in a mood where we're getting on top of it. So I'm a little bit hopeful in that sense. But in terms of behavioural changes, of course, there could be long-term behavioural changes. So the scarring in the economy, the way in which the economy will be slightly different to what it was back during March. And the OBR estimates the effect of that of about 3% of GDP, where the economy might be persistently smaller than it would have been even once we've recovered. So you think about people working from home, for example, rather than working in the middle of cities in office blocks, that will have an impact on businesses that need that footfall. You think about aviation, Are people going to be traveling and flying as much as they would for business meetings now that they've got used to using Zoom? So those kind of impacts might be around for quite some time. But the third point is, what does the government do to help us bridge out of this crisis? And critically, how does it handle the point that Rain very rightly raised about those jobs that unfortunately are going to be gone in the future? How do we transition that part of the workforce into the parts of the economy which are going to be expanding? And that is down to largely government policy and to a degree timing. Now, the government tried to start that transition actually before they were aware that a second wave was coming, because they went out of furlough, which held jobs in suspension, into the the JSS scheme, which basically left it to employers to make that difficult decision as to whether they wanted to hold that labour within their businesses or release it into the marketplace. So you're going to come to, at some point next year, a rerun of that kind of scenario, maybe not precisely in that form, but the government trying to feel its way into releasing labour into the market, but they're going to have to provide lots of training, boosting apprenticeships, skills, all of those kind of things, plus support for people trying to find work to try and blunt that surge in unemployment that's going to be otherwise happening.
Yeah, and Mel, because you sit in this position, you're a Conservative MP, but your position at the head of the Treasury Select Committee gives you a certain sort of above the fray status in some respects. Can you do the difficult job for us of trying to mark the government's homework on economic policy so far? What's it got right and what do you think it's got wrong?
Okay, so in terms of the economy, I think they've got a lot right, actually, because we've gone into completely uncharted waters. I mean, never before has HMRC been required to run a system of furlough, for example, that puts almost a third of workers on a job support payment scheme, to roll out the support scheme for the self-employed, to roll out business bounce back loans to the number of businesses that have taken advantage of them. There's been a huge amount that's happened at great scale and great pace, and totaling about £280 billion, an eye-watering amount of money. And I think for having done that, they have to have a very high score. Almost inevitably, though, it's not been perfect. And one of the points I would point to are the number of people that have fallen through the gaps in support. So the Treasury Select Committee estimates that at certainly more than 1 million people. And one example of that, to stick with furlough, would be those individuals working through their own businesses who receive some of their income by way of dividend, and the government has not counted that towards any furlough entitlement. They've said that it's too complicated. Now, I think when the first furlough scheme came out back at the beginning of the crisis, I think that was a reasonable excuse because everything was happening very quickly and you can't work up every scheme. There's a risk of fraud, for example, and lots of dead weight if you tackle that problem. But I think the second time round, I do think that it's a blemish on the government's record that they haven't come up with a way of providing that support to those people. So that's broadly how I would see it.
That's very fair-minded of you. Thank you. That's great. Lizzie, let me come to you, because obviously at Burger King you've got your ear very close to the ground across all the different outlets you've got. What again, in very broad terms, what's been the story of Burger King as a business through this pandemic?
I think it's been a very mixed bag. I think that we've been very, very fortunate for the government assistance that's come in, and we wouldn't have survived without it. But I think it's very important to reiterate that it was there for a purpose. And I mean, we use the word furlough internally, but I think we all need to remember that it is a job retention scheme. And, you know, it was there to retain jobs and to keep the economy able to, we've been able to bounce back very quickly as a result. Sometimes at very short notice, both ways, reopening and closing again. But it's been there to be able to have that flexibility that we were able to provide jobs as soon as we need them again. So that was shown, obviously, we've in the local lockdown recently that we had in England, that we had to shut quite a few stores which were in shopping centre locations, etc. A lot of travel hubs are obviously still closed. So it's been a sort of tale of two halves, I think. At first it was very distressing and very worrying for a lot of our employees to understand what was happening. I think once we understood that we could operate safely, which we can in our kitchens, and we're very fortunate that we can still operate a takeaway business and a drive-through or a home delivery business, that we realised there was a lot of demand for our food. I think when we reopened our test sites, our sales went up about 300%, because even though people love their sourdough and their home cooking, I think it was a definite resurgence of, as soon as that food was available again, people did want to go out and have have a change. So I think that gives us a lot of confidence in our offering and in the economy coming forward and bouncing back, that I think there is the demand there. And as we've seen from the Eat Out to Help Out scheme in the summer, though a bit controversial now, the demand is there if encouraged, and the footfall and the consumer confidence is there. So I think we're now seeing a sort of leveling off. I think it's very important that consumer confidence is the thing that increases, as was mentioned by Rain as well, because that will drive people back to the high streets and the footfall. I'm also the chair of the CBI's Under 35 committee, and listening to sort of young voices in the business world as well. Though home working has been an option, it's definitely not something that we want to do long term. And I think it's very important that we remember that young people do need to get back into the offices and back into office blocks, and it's where we meet friends. I mean, I was in the office yesterday and it was all the young people straight away came back, wanted to sort of be there and see people before Christmas. And I think it's really important to look at the positives there as well, that you know, it might not all be, you know, working from home is possible, but it's sometimes not the best option. And I think so see some kind of blend of that was really positive yesterday as well to see, and also Central London looking a little bit more happy again after all that. So yeah, a mixed year, but we've been very fortunate that you know, from the government support and also for you know, for customers wanting to come back and enjoy our food.
Yeah, and Lizzie, we've heard from Mel and from Rain the kind of macro projections, the OBR saying the economy might return to pre-pandemic levels at around the end of 2022 potentially. But from the Burger King perspective, when do you expect to get back to pre-pandemic levels?
We hope to be sort of in line with like probably Q2 next year. We would hope. I think the big thing for us is the split in where our footfall comes from. So like I said, we're currently sales-wise doing okay, but a lot of we're lucky with the portfolio effect that we have drive-through restaurants offsetting some of our inline high street restaurants, which have seen significant downtrade due to the footfall numbers, like I said. So hopefully we're sort of staggering that forecast back up over Q1, and hopefully doing some stuff that will entice customers back. But yeah, I think hopefully by H2 will be definitely solid, but hopefully sooner than that. I think we need to take a cautious view, but yeah, we're optimistic as well, hopefully.
Yeah, and when you're making those plans, what is the biggest variable? Further future lockdowns or something else?
Yeah, it's more the confidence of getting people back to high streets, and like you said about, you know, if employers are encouraged to send people back to offices, and there's that, you know, it's encouraged more and people feel a bit more confident to be out and about more, I do think we'll just see that natural footfall. I think Mel raised the point that's correct as well. Like, it depends where those people are. So obviously currently in my area, it's a lot busier than it would have been, you know, with people working from home a lot more. So lots more local cafes, etc., are busier. So it's where people are, and I think the more people are getting back to their sort of pre-COVID day-to-day, we will probably see that return. But we have had, you know, there's also been a shift in home delivery, and we've had a lot of extra custom there. Our home delivery sales this year have more than doubled, and the percentage of our home delivery sales are really high there, which is great to sort of support our sales, but being slightly less profitable than walk-in sales due to the commission rates, etc. Yeah, we hope you know, it's not a sustainable thing to sort of keep us going. So hopefully that shift will come back over the first half, and that's what we've forecasted.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a few questions coming in. That's great. Keep them coming. I'll turn to those in a second. But Ray, before I do that, can I just come back to you? You mentioned business investment as the kind of missing piece here. What do you think? What's missing? What's happening? What needs to happen in order for that to step up to the mark?
Yeah, so if we look at sort of where output in the economy is as a whole, and the drivers of that, I think business investment is still around 20 or 30% below pre-pandemic levels, or the trajectory we would have been on had we not faced this economic and health crisis. And of course, the real challenge for business is, in some sense, what Lizzie was articulating, when it's such an uncertain outlook, and we don't quite know. The vaccine is here, and I think that will absolutely help, but how quickly that can be rolled out, what that does to consumer confidence, what that does to, you know, and some of the structural trends we're facing in the economy and the changes around working from home, around, it means there's such a big piece of uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the death nails for business investment, because you're trying to, calculate return on investment over a longer period of time. So it's absolutely that uncertainty around investment that makes things really challenging. The second big issue is around not just the cost of finance, but access to finance. At the moment, businesses are having to invest in repurposing their businesses to make them COVID secure, and that's taking up some of their working capital, and they've had to, for periods of time they've had no revenue coming in through the door. That means your cash available to invest back into your business is being hammered. You're reducing your overall cash reserves, and we can see that from across our surveys. Concerns around cash to keep their businesses viable is really so businesses are having to deal with the immediate, and that makes investing for the long term really difficult. But I think we can see some positives around business investment, and we're keen to work with the government to really amplify that. So if you look at what SMEs did over the period during lockdown, over 60% of businesses invested in some form of digital technology to transform their business, and really what we want to do is to roll that to a wider range of businesses. So one of the ideas we have is a sort of invest to grow scheme, where a little bit similar to the Eat Out to Help Out, where you have technology providers the government could provide essentially a discount for investment in cloud computing, in the advice to almost digitally transform your business. And the providers could help to group together some of those claims on behalf of the government to take away some of the administration burden for SMEs. It's very hard as an SME to access a new scheme. So there are ways you can make that easier for them to access, to essentially make it more affordable to invest in some of the technologies that businesses know they need, but it's really hard to make the leap at the moment when the economic outlook is so uncertain. So that's just one example. And I think there's also a huge example around business rates reform, and how we make it easier for businesses to invest, particularly in our high streets, where in towns and city centres where things have been more challenging, not just around the pandemic, but before that.
Yeah. Mel, let me come to you, because this fits quite neatly with your third big point, was your third big variable, which was what's government policy going to be and what effect will that have. When it comes to business investment, particularly I guess with a mind to the question you mentioned about how does it deal with jobs that are permanently gone, what role do you hope that government will play in this?
Well, I think following on from Rain's points, all of which I agree with, one of the things we haven't focused on too much in this discussion so far is paying everything back. And of course, there is a moment in time when the government will start to talk more concretely about what that looks like. And it seems inconceivable that tax won't play a very significant part in that. So when will that conversation start? I think it might start in earnest around the budget next March. And I'm not saying we'll get lots of detail at that point, but I think we'll get more detail. And it's important we get detail in line with keeping the markets confident to keep lending to us at these historically low levels of interest, which is of course important to business too. But when they do start that conversation, I think two things matter. One is that they don't want to start it too early in terms of talking about tax increases and paying it back, because that will choke off the animal spirits that drive the economy. But secondly, when they do take those decisions, I think it's very important, as Rain has suggested, that they look at ways of incentivizing business and investment in business in particular, through the tax system. And there are a myriad of different ways in which they could do that. I mean, just to pick a couple on business rates has been mentioned, you could look at the allowances for investment, the tax allowances there, making those even more attractive than they are at the moment. You could look at losses that have been incurred by businesses being able to roll backwards more effectively than even forwards, as we have at the moment, as tax offsets, all sorts of different approaches. So I think the first thing is that, don't have those kind of conversations too early. Be very sensitive to where we are in terms of growth, and when you have them, try and be positive about tax with business rather than negative. Now that does mean you have to make even tougher choices elsewhere, of course, but I think that's the important way to go. There's one caveat I would quickly add on a less optimistic note. I think at some point corporation tax is going to rise. That's my own prediction. And the reason I say that is that I think the Treasury's view consistently that when they ask business what they want, corporation tax is very rarely raised. Business rates always is raised. If you look at international competitiveness around corporation tax, we come down from 28% to 19% currently, and we are very competitive internationally. And I think in terms of the Chancellor looking at the big ticket, heavy raising taxes, he's probably going to find it very difficult to resist going to corporation tax. But that's not inside information. That's just my personal view.
I mean, Mel, you're right, of course, that tax is an important way of paying back a mountain of public debt. But another way is growth, economic growth, which can have a significant, rapid impact. And I guess one of the things I think about this government is I'm not quite sure where it sits between a sort of growth agenda and a more fiscally prudent agenda, in the sense that number 10 and number 11 seem to be in slightly different places on that. You've got Boris Johnson, Michael Gove talking about Roosevelt and the New Deal, which suggests public spending, pump priming, big investment to stimulate growth, and then Rishi Sunak talking about his sacred duty to balance the books. Would it help if the government got its head in one place on those questions?
Well, I'm not sure I'd entirely buy the premise of your question. I don't think they're all over the place with this, but I think there is naturally, as there always is, a tension between number 10, who will be interested in policy and spending, and particularly this government. You've got to bear in mind that the 2019 manifesto was very centred around levelling up, spending a lot on infrastructure. I think the Prime Minister's general orientation is towards spending and investment, etc., and the growth agenda. What Rishi's got to balance against that, of course, is these horrendous, catastrophic economic figures that are now having to be cleaned up as a consequence. Growth absolutely is one of the ways of dealing with the deficit. Borrowing more money clearly is not something we can do. We've got to clear that up. Tax, I think the Chancellor will have to look at the very big heavy lifting taxes, including he'll have to seriously look at income tax, I think, national insurance and VAT. We'd have a long discussion about that, but I think he's going to have to look at that despite the manifesto commitments. But the other thing is spending. Now, spending's fine if it's going into the right places and it's generating growth and it's giving value for money. It's not fine if it's being sprayed around and it's unproductive. Even if you've got low levels of interest, you can borrow at 0% and you can still invest in projects that return a negative return. So you've got to get that bit right. I'll leave you with one final thought on the importance of controlling spending and the power of it in terms of tax. When I was a minister at the Treasury in 2018, and I may have got this slightly wrong, but the broad gist I think is right, I asked the question, what would happen if we maintained government spending in real terms since I think I chose 1999? What would that save compared to what we're spending today? And what would that mean in terms of tax? And the meaning in terms of tax is if since 1999 to 2018, you had held public spending in real terms, you would have enough money to abolish employee national insurance and take everybody earning up to £100,000 a year out of income tax altogether. Now, that is such an astonishing point to make that you need to run away and check it. But I think those figures are broadly right. So, this idea of, keep spending here, there and everywhere has a real consequence for taxation and in turn, the level of income that people have to spend and the outlook for the economy. So we're going to take some decisions around spending, but at the moment there isn't much evidence of that, I would say.
Okay, that's fascinating. Let me turn to a question that's come in from Michael Hurst. And Lizzie, if I can come to you with this one, because I think Michael's one of a number of people who are asking whether we have any sense yet of what changes in consumer behaviour caused by that pandemic are likely to be permanent, or which are going to evaporate when life returns to normal. What's your sense at Burger King of what's likely to be permanent as a result of what we've been through?
I think it's definitely the reliance on home delivery, and I think we can see that across, with everyone working from home, Amazon deliveries. The only traffic around my area in Shepherd's Bush was delivery vans and drivers during the first lockdown. So I think the consumer behaviour we're definitely going to see stay is, I think, a more reliance on home delivery, and I think that's unavoidable. I think not just because of the safety of it, just because of the convenience. And I think this has, as you said as well, Rain, that there was a lot of businesses investing in online and tech and home delivery and delivering products. It was already big with Amazon, but it's now getting even bigger, and retailers have really stepped up to that. So I think that is a slight concern for retail as well as food. I think for the food and drink sector, you know, as I've said before, the second those pubs and restaurants were open, people came back. And I do think they might not maybe visit as regularly due to their working commitments, but they will. People do want to go out and enjoy themselves. And I think that I take a lot of pride in that, from being like in the restaurant and pub sector all my life, that it's you know, those industries provide entertainment, and people don't have that at the moment, especially with the arts being closed, etc. There is so much love for those sectors, and we have seen that come back. So I think, yeah, maybe not quite as regularly, but I do believe that there will be that resurgence, and people do want to enjoy themselves and have that time, you know, music and live and arts and those sectors. I do genuinely believe they will come back. I don't know when because of the restrictions, of course, but I do. I'm very positive about it, and we are as a business as well. But I do think we will see more home delivery meals in. Families do want to spend more time with each other as well, and I think that has taken it's definitely been prevalent with our own business, our own employees. It's been great to have that side of things. So I think a bit of a blend, but we're not as negative.
Lizzie, I'm just trying to figure out what effect that would have on a business like yours. Does that mean that over time, if that were to happen, you would end up potentially employing fewer people?
Well, we'd like to think that we'd actually open more sites, but maybe different locations. We've seen a huge resurgence in our drive-through operations at the moment. So people going, which actually means people going out for the day, then they will then take their family for a sort of bigger meal. So we do see less of the one-off transactions, people maybe coming in for a coffee or a small item of food. Our ticket value has actually come up during these times because people are out and about less, just picking up the odd thing. So there is a shift in that for like a sort of takeaway business, and we've seen the likes of obviously Pret with their coffee subscription as well. You can see they're really trying to get people to come back in for those sort of small transactions. So yeah, I think it's going to be sort of maybe less but more value. So I think actually it will just shift the balance a little bit, but I don't see it as particularly as a negative.
Yeah. Okay. Mel, can I come back to you, because we've had a question in from Wayne Andrews, who's from Grace Church Treasury Risk Consultants. It takes us into a different area, but an interesting one. He asked, why is it that whenever the economy, Brexit, and so on are discussed, nobody ever considers exchange rate risk? Pound and the euro, the pound and the dollar have been volatile this year. It's a huge issue for importers and exporters. Mel, is it one we think about enough?
No, it's not. Not in the sense that it's a sort of hot topic of conversation, but the Treasury will be thinking about it very carefully. And this, I think, goes back to the point about low interest rates and what our exposure is to an interest rate hike. So, without going too much into it, one of the reasons why we've got low rates is that inflation is well under control, and the Bank of England has a remit to target 2%. We're well below that at the moment. Now, I suppose it is possible you could have a scenario, a no-deal Brexit could be the start of it, who knows, where the recovery in our country is not as quick as it is elsewhere. There could be possible implications for sterling around that, and no Brexit, etc. Cost-push inflation coming into the system. And it is possible under that scenario that this rather benign situation of the government being able to issue debt, the Bank of England through QE having and its remit to keep inflation low, just buying that back in, which funds the debt and also provides underpins the low interest rates, could be disrupted. And under those circumstances, if interest rates were to increase, the question would then become, what impact would that have on the deficit, because we'd be having to pay a high rate of interest on the money that we owe. Traditionally and conventionally, most economists have said, oh, well, you know, it's all long dated debts, and, you know, not much of it's index linked, and it's not really going to be an issue. But I think actually, if you look at it more closely, I think sensitivity to interest rate spikes on the amount we'd have to pay back on our debt has grown through time, particularly as we've had to refinance some of the debt that's matured through time, that's become shorter dated. And so I suppose, in a sort of simple terms, what I'm saying is I think we should worry about the exchange rate. We should worry about future inflation. We should worry about what happens if investors prefer to put it all into America and other markets, because the UK economy is not such a sure bet as it has been in the past. And after all, we're all kind of in the same boat at the moment. We don't want to be in a slower boat. I think that's my point. Because if interest rates spiked up, and you would be in suddenly a very, very hairy situation for the economy overall, and the state of the public finances.
And Rain, I mean, we've got so used to the idea of low interest rates. I mean, we spent a decade expecting them to rise, and they haven't. What chances do you think there are of rises at the back end of 2021?
I still think we're going to be in a low interest rate environment for a really long time in the UK, despite some of the, I agree with Mel around some of the risks, but partly that is structural changes and with an aging society and around the global economy. And so it's something I'm less concerned about in the immediate. I think we need to, our challenge is more around sort of getting growth going in the economy than ending up with another problem with growth is too quick. We rebound too quickly, and maybe that leads to rising inflation. I think our focus needs to be on growth and preventing higher unemployment and the associated scarring around that. And maybe just to add a little bit to Mel's comments around tax and the wider fiscal position, I think from that one, we absolutely need to focus on growth. I think, an approach around austerity and cutting public spending is not going to help us manage the public finances over the medium term. I think you do need to look at the overall levels of spending relative to per head. And if you look at what's happened with local authority spending, that's previously been cut right back. And actually this crisis has shown that, we need to rebalance some of that, particularly around social care. But I think he's right that over the medium term, I think if you look over 4 or 5 years out, to get debt into a more stable position, we will need to look at taxation across the piece. And business taxation is one portion, but I agree with what he says. We need to look more broadly. I think one of the things, and you can see why businesses talk about business rates reform. Our overall taxation on business property is 4 times as large as it is in Germany. So it really affects our high streets, our manufacturers, and our distribution. So I think, look, we need to be mindful of how competitive we are on corporation tax more broadly. But, if we could see significant reform to business rates where we're reducing that burden by, say, 20%, I think that would help to get investment going. And if that means we tolerate a slightly higher level of corporation tax, that might be the way forward. But that's a much more medium term. And we'd also need to think about the financial services in particular, because of course they face a surcharge on corporation tax. So we need to be mindful about how we keep them competitive.
Yeah. Mel, we're running out of time very quickly, but let me just, we've got a number of questions that have come in about how to achieve certainty in these incredibly uncertain circumstances. And I don't, we can all see that the government has struggled both to deal with the tumultuous things that are happening all around it and to plan ahead. Now, I don't know whether you think it's been a mistake not to have a budget, but it does feel like we need a budget soon, don't we, to point us in a certain direction.
Yes, I think the indications are probably March of next year that there will be one. I think the chance can be forgiven for delaying and postponing budgets given the uncertainty that there is around. One of the knock-on consequences of that actually have been tax announcements that have been made outside of fiscal events. And in terms of providing certainty, one of the really good things that the 2010 government did was to bring in the tax roadmap and to make it clear that those announcements would be made around fiscal events. And I think the sooner we get back to that, the better, rather than having some tax changes which are just literally popping up every now and again and everybody thinks, well, where did that come from?
Okay, look, folks, the clock has defeated us. Mel, Thrive, thank you very much. Lizzie Hills, thank you too, and to Rain. Just a reminder, as I said at the beginning, that tomorrow at 10, there's that really interesting looking webinar with Pfizer and Devi Sridhar from the University of Edinburgh about the vaccine. So do sign up for that through the CBI website, events at CBI, and after that, we look forward to seeing you again on this webinar next Monday. But thank you for joining us today.